This presentation is tracking local food purchases through Cultivate Michigan for the School Nutrition Association of Michigan Conference. Hi there, my name is Colleen Matz, and I'm the Farm to Institution Specialist at the MSU Center for Regional Food Systems and the coordinator of the Michigan Farm to Institution Network, which is also supported by MSU Extension. MIFIN, as we'll call it, is a space for learning, sharing, and working together to help farm to institution programs grow. We work to help institutions reach the Michigan Good Food Charter goal of institutions sourcing 20% Michigan foods by 2020 and measure their progress along the way. Since this year is 2020, we are working throughout this year and into next with our members to identify some additional priorities and goals for future years beyond 2020, but for now, we'll continue with operations and tracking as usual. Cultivate Michigan is the local food purchasing campaign of the Michigan Farm to Institution Network that helps institutions track their progress in local food purchasing and provide some promotional materials for some Michigan grown agricultural products. When institutions join the campaign, food service professionals have an opportunity to track their food purchases through an online dashboard on our website. You can see a screenshot of it here. You can find more information at cultivatemichigan.org. We also have a session in the conference this year on how to join Cultivate Michigan if you're interested in checking that out. Nearly 90 institutions and other businesses had joined Cultivate Michigan by October 2019, including 79 institutions, which you'll see here. But participation in our campaign continues to grow, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. Through the Cultivate Michigan campaign, we ask institutions to track Michigan and total spending for some major food categories, as well as for Cultivate Michigan featured foods, as we call them. These are Michigan agricultural products that are featured on a seasonal basis. Each year, we offer Cultivate Michigan awards for those institutions that track progress and reach milestones towards that 20% by 2020 goal. 3 institutions received Cultivate Michigan awards in November 2019. 2 for reaching 15% local purchasing of their total food spend, and 1 for reaching 10% local purchasing. By the end of 2018, 20 foods had been featured through Cultivate Michigan, which you can see here. That's the year we'll be focusing on in this presentation to share some of the tracking efforts of Cultivate Michigan members and of 10 cents grantees. In the 2018 calendar year, very few Cultivate Michigan members track their local food purchases through the online dashboard. It seems that tracking local food purchases remains really challenging for institutional food service directors and buyers of all types and sizes. This is likely due to very real time constraints, as well as limited availability of information on product sources from conventional suppliers. Those institutions that did supply data for at least 3 of 4 quarters all reached milestones toward that 20% by 2020 goal. 3 institutions received Cultivate Michigan awards in November 2019, as I mentioned. In order to protect the anonymity of institutions participating in Cultivate Michigan, the information we're going to present today focuses primarily on the types and forms of featured foods purchased rather than on the dollar amounts for spending. And this is because there were so few institutions that provided that information. We'll also cover information on Cultivate Michigan featured foods purchased by the 57 school and districts grantees that participated in 10 cents a meal for school kids and farms pilot. In 10 cents is the easier way to say that, in the 2018 to 2019 school year. And for those who may not know, 10 cents is a state-funded match incentive reimbursement program to encourage the purchase and use of Michigan-grown fruits, vegetables, and legumes in participating school food service programs. Based on data available, we can see that institutions are purchasing a really wide range of the Cultivate Michigan featured foods. And looking at the forms of these foods that were purchased shows there's significant opportunity for Michigan suppliers to provide more minimally processed Michigan-grown foods in particular. All of the Cultivate Michigan members who tracked their spending in 2018 indicated that they purchased local food from a broadline distributor and a specialty dairy distributor. Purchases of Michigan foods were also reported through a food hub, a farmer cooperative, and direct from a farm. Collectively, these institutions purchased about 14% of their fruits and vegetables in all forms from Michigan sources, and 80% of their dairy products from Michigan sources. Very small dollar amounts were also reported for meats and dry goods, grocery items purchased from Michigan sources, but they amounted to less than 0.01%, so a very tiny amount of the total dollar value spent for these categories. Combined, the Cultivate Michigan members who reported spending indicated that they purchased all 20 of the featured foods, that's by 2018, in at least one form. Forms include fresh, meaning whole and unprocessed, minimally processed, meaning forms like dried, frozen, sliced, or chopped, and other forms, meaning processing, such as heating or canning, that changes the inherent character of the food. Now, with the exception of beets, at least one purchase of all featured foods was from a Michigan source. You can see here that the featured foods purchased in various forms as reported by Cultivate Michigan member institutions. And note that kale, asparagus, cherries, winter squash, beets, cabbage, onions, and blueberries each represented less than 1% of the total food spending on fruits and vegetables. That indicates that these 8 products are infrequently used in food service programs, or at least infrequently reported to us through Cultivate Michigan. It's also too important to note that for the purposes of this chart here, we considered white milk fresh, and flavored milk, since it has some additional ingredients, is considered minimally processed. The Cultivate Michigan berry feature that you see here includes blackberries, strawberries, and raspberries, and blueberries were featured separately. Similarly, the Cultivate Michigan stone fruits feature includes nectarines, peaches, and plums. Cherries were featured separately. Apples and milk were the 2 Cultivate Michigan featured foods purchased in the greatest amounts. They were also the foods most frequently sourced from Michigan. And you can see here about 73% of fresh whole apples were purchased from Michigan sources. 64% of minimally processed apples, that typically means apple slices, were purchased from Michigan sources, and 35% of applesauce was purchased from Michigan sources. For milk, 100% was purchased from Michigan sources, representing 12.5% of the aggregate overall food budget of reporting institutions. And this shows that institutions purchasing large volumes of milk, like schools, could hit a Cultivate Michigan milestone through milk purchases alone. And this chart here shows some of the most commonly purchased fresh and whole foods among the Cultivate Michigan featured foods, but excluding milk and apples. For all of these products, there are large gaps, as you can see, between overall purchases and what is currently being purchased from Michigan sources. All of these products then represent opportunities for Michigan growers and suppliers to fill these gaps and make up the difference. For example, of the $6,250-ish spent on fresh berries, blackberries, strawberries, and raspberries, only 1% was sourced from Michigan. Likewise, of the $9,520 spent on fresh tomatoes, only 1% was sourced from Michigan. Many of the Cultivate Michigan featured foods were purchased primarily in a minimally processed form, which by the USDA definition means processing that does not alter the inherent character of the agricultural product. This can mean freezing, cutting, and drying, but it excludes heating, pickling, canning, and other value-added processes. However, very few of the minimally processed items that were reported were sourced from Michigan. These purchases also suggest opportunities for Michigan farmers and suppliers as well. So you can see here that about 50% of the canned legumes purchased were from Michigan sources, but that means another 50% were not. About 3% of the minimally processed carrots, which are cut, sliced, shredded coins, were purchased from Michigan sources. None of the frozen potato products, none of the pre-cooked egg products, the canned peaches, or the pre-cut celery that were purchased from Michigan sources. And those dollar amounts there all represent opportunity for Michigan farms and food suppliers. So now we're going to take a look at the Cultivate Michigan featured foods that were purchased by the 10-cent schools and districts. And note that we're only looking at foods that are eligible for 10 cents. And that includes fruits, vegetables, and legumes that are in a whole and fresh form or in a minimally processed form. Further processed products were not eligible to be included for 10 cents reimbursements. And you'll also see we added a couple more featured foods here because we're moving into the 2019 year. So we'll loop back on what those 2019 features were in a minute here. So the schools and districts participating in 10 cents in the 2018-2019 year spent more than $1,121,500 on Michigan fruits, vegetables, and legumes. And as you can see at the total here, that included $1,058,600 on Cultivate Michigan featured foods. This shows the total amount of the 57 10 cents grantees spent on each eligible food, as well as the number of different schools and districts that purchased each. On average, each school or district participating in 10 cents purchased about 12 of the 22 Cultivate Michigan foods eligible for the 10 cents program. And this chart here shows that 8 different Michigan fruits and vegetables were purchased by at least 40 different schools and districts that participated in 10 cents. Apples, carrots, peppers, winter squash, blueberries, cucumbers, tomatoes, and stone fruits. So those are the featured foods that were purchased by the greatest number of 10 cents grantees. And you'll see here, as I mentioned, that we added more featured foods to the Cultivate Michigan campaign in 2019. They included beef, cucumbers, broccoli, and garlic. Since beef is a meat product, that was not considered in the 10 cents reporting that we just mentioned. And as institutions continue to track their purchases of featured foods and other Michigan foods, farmers and suppliers will have more and more opportunities to provide institutions with the Michigan products they want in the forms they need. So that's part of the reason we're doing all of this, is to communicate back to those Michigan farmers and food suppliers what you all want in terms of Michigan products and in what forms you need them. You'll see here that we did just recently add nearly 150 new K-12 members to Cultivate Michigan through a partnership with Chartwells. And any of those institutions that are already signed up and would like some help with their data collection and tracking efforts, they can email us at info@cultivatemichigan.org. And if you're interested in learning more about Cultivate Michigan, signing up to track your progress, or receiving resources for sourcing and using local foods, you can sign up at cultivatemichigan.org. And for more institution about the network, visit myfarmtoinstitution.org. Thank you, and best of luck with your local food purchasing and the school year ahead.